Bona tarda a totes, bona tarda a tots. Moltíssimes gràcies per venir. Us he de dir que estem molt contents per l'interès que ha despertat la presència de la senyora Delphine Moralis a Barcelona. Molts de vosaltres sabeu que això, podria dir improvisat, no, però ho hem arreglat aquests últims dies perquè vam veure que era possible demanar-li una conferència i ho hem organitzat aquests darrers dies i és veritat que ha despertat molt interès. Gràcies, gràcies. Per què estem aquí? Jo diria, primer perquè la Fundació La Caixa forma part de les xarxes europees de fundacions, específicament la European Foundation Center, que és la predecessora de l'actual PHILEA, des de fa 26 anys. I em miro el doctor Banda, que el tinc aquí a primera fila, perquè ell també, que va ser predecessor meu amb la posició que ara jo tinc a la Fundació La Caixa, amb l'impuls de la part de filantropia científica, i ell va ser el que va convèncer la Caixa que havíem d'estar a Brussel·les, que havíem d'estar amb les altres institucions filantròpiques. Per tant, Enric, gràcies, perquè avui estem aquí gràcies a tu, i ell va començar a formar part dels òrgans de govern, etc. També gràcies a la Coordinadora Catalana de Fundacions, que ens heu ajudat a fer una amplitud de convocatòria molt gran. També l'Associació Española de Fundaciones, que també ha volgut col·laborar en aquest acte. Gràcies per tot aquest suport i gràcies especialment la Glòria Oliver, la vicepresidenta de la Coordinadora, i la Sara Pérez, gerent de la Coordinadora, també per acompanyar-nos avui. Vull fer, si em permeteu, una salutació especial al president de la Fundació de l'Esperança, president d'UNICEF a Catalunya i del Club de Roma, l'amic i el senyor Jaume Lanaspa, que ens acompanya també aquí avui. Gràcies a tots, per tant, i a tants i tants amics que he pogut saludar, veure, col·legues que estem impulsant la filantropia aquí des de fa molt temps per venir i participar d'aquest acte. I també, i perdoneu que m'allargui amb les gràcies, però si no ho faig, jo crec que em sabria molt greu, he de donar moltes gràcies a l'equip del Palau Macaya, perquè els hi hem provocat un daltabaix tan gran amb aquesta improvisació i ho han fet amb una professionalitat que semblava que no era res, però sabem que és difícil, canviar a l'últim moment coses, adaptar-se, etc. Per tant, gràcies, crec que alguns d'aquí em sentiu, esteu més per darrere, gràcies a tots. La Delphine Moralis és una professional de llarga trajectòria, sobretot en el sector cívic, i sobretot de la defensa dels drets socials, i molt en especial de la defensa de la infància. Jo aquestes paraules li acabo de dir amb ella en anglès, per tant, encara que no m'entén, o m'entén una mica, perquè com a francòfona entén una mica de català, però sap més o menys de què va. Ella va estudiar filosofia i també és una experta en temes europeus, ha estat secretària de Terres des Hommes Internacional, secretària general de Missing Children Europe, i des de fa uns anys també, i compatibilitzat amb el seu càrrec a PHILEA, és la presidenta de NABEL, l'agència belga de cooperació al desenvolupament. Per tant, és una persona que pot aportar molt valor al que anem a parlar avui, que és d'aquest ecosistema, com han vingut a dir, europeu de filantropia. Dear Delphine, thank you. Thank you for making it possible to be here today. I've been introduced you briefly in Catalan to the audience, but I have to say just for you that this city and this country has seen born some of the ancient European foundations. We still found some of them operating today after 5 or 6 centuries of history, such as San Pau Foundation, for instance, that is even older. The one we know perfectly, that Compagnia San Paolo, they take the same name. That company is based in Torino. But philanthropy in this land has more future than history, let me say that. And as you can see, for the response of all the audience, we would like to hear about what you can say about the future of philanthropy in Europe. So, Delphine, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aniel. Thank you to all of you, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends. It's really a pleasure for me to be here in this beautiful Palau this afternoon. And I'd like to read up a little bit before I travel, and I was absolutely delighted to read about Josep Puig Cadafach. I will apologize for my pronunciation. Who is the architect of this space of reflection, dialogue, and transformation. I learned he was an innovator who was inspired by a wide network of connections across Europe and beyond, leaving important legacies in multiple fields during intense periods of peace and war. This somehow feels, especially on the 8th of May, as a perfect setting for my talk today, during which I will lift the curtain on the beautiful European philanthropic ecosystem and question whether it can live up to the challenges of our time, using collaboration, innovation, and solidarity as a driver for relevant change. Now, of course, as a Belgian who naturally grew up being fed on chocolate, I have to add that the fact that this palace was apparently first built for a family of chocolate manufacturers makes me feel particularly welcome. Thank you to La Caixa for organizing this event in collaboration to the Catalan Coordinadora of Fundacions and the Spanish Association of Foundations. And a special thanks to the president of PHILEA, Ángel Font, whom I will not introduce in Catalan, because I would not be able to do so, but to whom my gratitude extends far beyond the one for this invitation. Thank you, Ángel. In the next 30 minutes, I would like to explore with you what the sector of philanthropy at European level looks like, how the external context is affecting us, and what the key trends are that we see emerge as PHILEA. Ángel already referred to it in his introduction, but for those who don't know PHILEA too well, let me say that you can feel fully excused by the fact that we are a fairly young organization. We were in fact created just 3 years ago as the result of the merger between two important institutions, the European Foundation Centre, the EFC on the one hand, and indeed La Caixa has been a member for 26 years, and the Donors and Foundations Network in Europe, short Delphine. PHILEA, the Philanthropy Europe Association, now brings together 300 members from 38 countries. Among our 300 members, we count some of the largest philanthropic organizations and foundations, including La Caixa, but also 26 philanthropy infrastructure organizations, including the Spanish Association of Foundations. Through our infrastructure organizations, we connect to about 7,500 philanthropic organizations from across the continent. And I will go into this in a little bit more detail, but first wanted to turn to you and test your personal connections with philanthropy, a sector which is often an invisible catalyst, supporting a multitude of areas which affect us all. So it's not a test, but I will ask you a couple of questions and kindly ask you to raise your hand if the answer to the question is yes. My first question is, do you enjoy discovering new socially engaged art? Yes. Have you or people in your environment been vaccinated for COVID? Do you enjoy in your local community to spend time in shared spaces? Did you or anyone in your environment ever rely on new frontier medical developments for treatment? Did you or anyone in your environment ever rely on social housing? And then an easy one. Did you ever visit the absolutely spectacular Science Museum Cosmo Caixa? Now, for the ones that didn't raise their hands, I think you should change your weekend plans. But with this now mapped, I think it's safe to say that you have all been in contact with philanthropy through your lives, and so have most of the people, communities, and organizations in Europe. In fact, Europe is the single one continent which counts the largest number of foundations. Even if less well known than US philanthropy, we are larger in numbers and in diversity. One of our latest studies, The Fabric of Giving 2025, analyzed data from 34 countries in Europe and found that the continent counts over 175,000 public benefit foundations. 17 of those 34 countries were able to provide relevant data on assets and endowments held by foundations for a total of 519 billion euro. 24 of the 34 surveyed countries had data on expenditure of foundations, amounting to 76 billion euro granted in the kind of causes we all benefit from, as we saw from the lift of hands just now. Overall, these amounts, of course, remain very modest compared to funds at the disposal of governments. But beyond funding, philanthropic organizations also have important non-financial means, from building connections over using their voice around key issues. They have the ability to take risks and think long-term, which is, for many right reasons, much more challenging for governmental donors relying on taxpayers' money. As you can see from the slide behind me, the landscape of public benefit foundations looks very different from one country to the next. Germany has the most public benefit foundations, 25,000. Estonia has the least public benefit foundations, 14. Spain has a strong sixth position, with 10,500 public benefit foundations counted. The prevalence of foundations and philanthropic activity altogether is closely connected to the enabling factors for giving, which again are different from one country to the next. In countries which score well in terms of ease of operation, with a favorable tax regime related to charitable giving, or in countries that allow for cross-border flows and have a supportive political, economic and socio-economic environment for philanthropy, the sector naturally flourishes. Overall, and based on data collected in 2022, this means there are more public benefit foundations, or there's more philanthropic activity in Northern and Western Europe, while in the Balkans, Central Europe and Southern Europe, this scores somewhat lower. Now, the environment of philanthropy is changing rapidly, and I'll say a few words about that in the next couple of minutes. But I expect that the picture of the enabling environment of philanthropy may look quite different by the time we publish an updated edition of this study. Let me, however, also add as a caveat that what is captured by the data on the number of foundations is what we know for institutional philanthropy. While we know that in many parts of the world, philanthropy, which literally means love for humanity, takes many different forms and is in constant evolution. Beyond the more traditional or institutional philanthropy, old and new forms of giving are emerging, and they are constantly in flux, from giving circles to community-based solidarity and everything in between. Over the next decades, the great wealth transfer that is expected, and which will bring the next generation in an inheritance of an expected $53 trillion will expect to have yet another impact on the face of philanthropy. A recent report on the state of giving in the UK pointed to a worrying fact that younger generations were giving less to charity, as they simply didn't think about it or didn't feel connected to charity. Then again, a report from France showed that people establishing foundations were becoming increasingly younger. And then if we look into the future, let's say into 2050, when 1 person in 4 in the world will be African, this again may paint a very different picture. Perhaps by then the Ubuntu philosophy, I am because you are, and its more indigenous forms of philanthropy will have become the norm. But back to the present for now. If the landscape of philanthropy is different from one country to the next, it is at least as diverse in all other dimensions that define philanthropy. Based on our own snapshot of the sector, we see that the population focus of foundations includes many different segments of societies, with children and youth, disadvantaged communities, and researchers being among the top beneficiaries. Programs in which they invest are equally diverse, with education and training, arts and culture, health, socioeconomic development, and environmental causes constituting the top 5. When it comes to the assets available to foundation, within our membership, we find that 60% of the foundations are endowed, while 40% is not. And as to the origins of these assets, we have within our membership 12% family foundations, 16% foundations with corporate origins, 17% foundations with banking or saving banks origins, and in terms of operations and activities, 60% of the foundations are grant-making and operating, 30% of the foundations are grant-making only, and 10% is operating only. Philanthropy is, in other words, so diverse that we often say at PHILEA that if you know one foundation, well, you know one foundation. And with this, you will understand why we use the metaphor of a forest to describe our membership and the broader philanthropic ecosystem. Like a forest, philanthropy is diverse, complex, and resilient, an ecosystem evolved of specific environments over longer periods of time. They are all rooted in the same soil, a common motivation to use their financial and non-financial resources for public good. And as they share the same soil, so do they also share the same external threats. Let me now, in this next section of my talk, focus a little bit on those external threats, or on the context in which philanthropy operates, and how this has evolved over the past couple of years. And then during the end of my talk, give you an update on what the trends in philanthropy are today and where they are heading. To be honest, the context we are seeing today goes beyond what I expected when I joined the sector almost 5 years ago. I joined in the middle of the pandemic, a difficult time for so many people and communities, which called upon philanthropy to come to the fore. It was a moment of deep reflection on the role and value of the sector. And while incredibly challenging, it was also a moment of hope to build back better. We talked a lot about our aspiration for a new normal. But for most communities around the world, the new normal didn't deliver. After the COVID pandemic came the war in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis, which today seem to have been only the beginning. At the time, we asked our members what they considered to be the 3 most important topics for philanthropy to invest in. And together they identified climate, equality, and democracy as being top of mind. And it's safe to say that these topics are today even more relevant than they were back then. When it comes to climate, 2024 was the first ever time the Earth's average temperature climbed to beyond 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial level. The climate crisis affects everything philanthropy does, and every community it cares about, as was seen just too painfully in this country very recently. Traditionally, though, climate change or climate has not been a priority for philanthropic investment, and criticism has been growing over the years around the fact that globally, only 2% of philanthropic giving is invested in climate. For many philanthropic practitioners, climate is seen as falling outside of the scope of the mission of their foundation. A deeper understanding of what is at stake, however, reveals the contrary. Climate is a health issue. Climate is a human rights issue. Climate is an educational issue. Climate is an economic issue. It is a security issue, and so much more than that. And that is why, at PHILEA, and with partners at different levels, we are proud to co-host the Philanthropy for Climate Coalition, a global movement of over 800 foundations spread across 21 countries and 6 continents, with a shared commitment to meaningful climate action. The commitment shared is one not about all becoming climate funders, but rather about, irrespectively of the mission of the organization, applying a climate lens to everything we do. The first ever progress report published on the Philanthropy for Climate movement just a few weeks ago revealed that 95% of the responding signatories had progressed on overall climate commitments. So that's good news. It helps to step into a commitment together. Signatories to the commitment are scaling up their climate funding, with 2/3 increasing programmatic or grant spending and 20% dedicating funds to climate action for the first time. Nearly 9 out of 10 responding signatories are supporting climate advocacy in their area of work and/or in their region. Less progress was, however, noted with regards to endowments and assets, which was noted as being the biggest challenge for foundations. With foundations, as mentioned, holding 519 billion euro in assets, this is clearly an important priority for the years to come. Divesting and making sure investments of assets and endowments align with organizational values is and should be a key priority for all who have access to what is considered to be not just the power, but perhaps the superpower of foundations. Making those superpowers work for the planet is ever more a moral imperative. When it comes to equality, the second area of priority defined by our membership a few years ago, challenges have unfortunately here too only increased. Between 2006 and 2021, the share of people living below the poverty line increased in 2/3 of the European countries. The cost of living crisis has further deepened this divide. In 2022, 44% of those in the bottom income decile struggled to make ends meet, compared to just 3% in the top decile. While newer EU member states have seen rising incomes and some reduction in inequality, older member states, in particular in southern countries, have experienced stagnation or even decline among the lowest earners. At the top, wealth is accumulating, and it's accumulating fast. In 2024, billionaire wealth in the world grew 3 times faster than the year before. 60% of this growth was attributed not to innovation or productivity, but to inheritance, monopoly owner, cronyism, and corruption. Many of the super rich, particularly in Europe, also owe part of their wealth to historical colonialism and exploitation of poorer countries. Since 2008, income for younger people has declined. This, as I'm sure you will understand, only scratches the surface of rising inequalities. Now, if identified by our members as one of the 3 key issues for philanthropy to address, it is also a topic with which it has a difficult relationship. In fact, philanthropic practices have faced increasing criticism for perpetuating the inequalities it seeks to mitigate. Some critics argue that philanthropic organizations are uncomfortable with reflecting on their own practices or challenging the systemic inequalities that benefit the powerful. Others criticize philanthropy for focusing on services rather than root causes of inequality, or that the sector suffers from a lack of diversity in its leadership and decision-making process. At PHILEA, we take these and other points of criticism as wonderful opportunities to improve and to make sure philanthropy can fully contribute to creating more equitable and just societies. This is one of the reasons why we decided to dedicate 2025 as our year of equality, and we are working with our members to learn and constantly improve. We also decided to center our annual PHILEA Forum around power and equality, not shying away from the fact that this is, for philanthropy, a delicate balancing act, and one that connects to its own legitimacy. As is the case for climate, inequality too cuts across other areas prioritized by philanthropy. It affects health, education outcomes, safety, social cohesion, and is impacted deeply by the climate crisis. One of the issues most affected by inequality is probably democracy, the last of the 3 themes defined as being of primary importance by philanthropy for the decade ahead. The correlation between rising inequality and growing democratic performance is one that increasingly is documented and understood. It is part of a broader trend of democratic backsliding, a concept which has sparked heated debate across the global stage. The health of democracy has, according to various indexes, been on a steady downward spiral since at least 2007. And over the past 108 days by now, this is when the president of traditionally one of the greatest defenders of democracy, the United States, took office, many of us have been even more concerned than what we have been before. From the dismantling of US aids to attacks on anything that relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, over substantiated rumors regarding the revocation of the 501c3 status of philanthropic and charitable organizations, onto a full war on tariff, it is safe to say that in just a short amount of time, tectonic plates of our international systems are going through radical and unsettling changes, which our sector is affected by and responding to. Allow me, though, before going into the impact of the US developments, to also remind ourselves of how in Europe too, the health of democracy has been declining and declining rapidly. Austria, the Netherlands, Portugal, and the UK, all countries long considered as democratic strongholds, are, for instance, witnessing significant threats on the rule of law and the freedom of press. In 2024, the European Parliament held elections that were to have significant impact on the future of European democracies. While central parties retained a strong position, the rise of Eurosceptic and far-right parties signals a potential shift in the political landscape in 2029. Meanwhile, the rise of far-right parties in historically stable democracies like Italy, Austria, Romania, the Netherlands, France, further underscores the vulnerability of Europe's democratic fabric. All of this affects philanthropy, as well as civil society at large, and all of the constituencies with which we partner. Democratic backsliding comes hand in hand with shrinking civic space and threats to the freedom of democracy, the freedom of giving, the freedom of philanthropy. To illustrate this with concrete examples, EU governments, including mine in Belgium, are discussing or imposing important reductions to tax incentives for giving. At both national and European level, questions are emerging around the role of public benefit organizations around advocacy or more political engagement, for instance, with regard to climate. In a growing number of countries, so-called foreign agent laws, inspired by Russian precedents, are being introduced. These foreign agent laws are set up to restrict cross-border philanthropy and request organizations that receive foreign funding to be included in a dedicated register of foreign-funded organizations. Worryingly, we have also seen a growing move of full-on smear campaigns and even police ratings on civil society organizations and philanthropic actors, in particular the ones that work around themes related to democratic freedoms, free media, and civic engagement. And while this is, at the moment, mostly happening in Central and Eastern Europe and in the Balkans, there's no reason to believe that it might not start emerging elsewhere. PHILEA, of course, is monitoring these developments very closely. We work with the European institutions to address these concerns based on what we call a European Philanthropy Manifesto. And this manifesto calls the institution to empower philanthropy, to facilitate cross-border philanthropy, to engage with philanthropy, to partner with philanthropy. And these steps, we argue, are key to moving to a single market for public good, so vitally needed if we want to address the global challenges affecting all of our societies today, as well as the generations of tomorrow. Maybe with this, European President von der Leyen, who this week launched a call to researchers to choose Europe for science, could also launch a call to those who want to invest in it. Choose Europe for philanthropy too. Going back to the broader topic of democracy, our members are also stepping up. Ahead of the European elections, our Democracy Thematic Network worked with a list of grantees which they supported collectively to engage in the historic moment. Our Journalism Funders Forum works to build up funding for independent and free media, the fourth pillar of democracy. We recently published a democracy briefer for philanthropic organizations to help guide reflections, and over the past 108 days, we have been building more bridges with our US partners, some of which are also members of PHILEA, and this to work more closely together and exchange crucial information. As we stand together for philanthropic freedoms as a core component of healthy democracies, we recently also launched a public statement in which we recall that the freedom to associate, to set up foundations, to express values, and to contribute to the common good is a cornerstone of civic life. The statement is being signed by an increasing number of organizations, including the Spanish Association of Foundations, all of whom believe in civic space where giving, participation, and collaboration can be encouraged, celebrated, and protected. We can, today, no longer take this for granted. But let me perhaps pause here and go back to where we started. I shared a few words about the wonderful forest of philanthropy with 175,000 organizations in Europe alone, investing billions of euros annually in causes we all care about, using their unique skills as innovators, risk-takers, and catalysts to support communities in every corner of Europe and at every level of society. Amidst their diversity, all of those populating the forest share the same soil and are faced to the same external threats, including a growing crisis of climate breakdown, inequality, and democratic backsliding. With this happening around us, I'm often thinking back of the words of Madeleine Albright, who described herself as an optimist who worries a lot. Or the words of Jean Monnet, who said he was neither an optimist nor a pessimist, he was merely determined. And being determined, hanging on to a vision of philanthropy, using its full potential to co-shape and support pluralistic, just, and resilient societies that center people and planet, is what we have chosen to do at PHILEA. The good news, yes, there is good news, is that philanthropy has been doing some extraordinary efforts to face the challenges at hand. These efforts can be seen in trends that range from changing internal setup and ways of working, focusing on new areas for philanthropic work, rethinking grant-making practices and relations to grantees. So when it comes to internal setups and ways of working, trends noted among philanthropic organizations since a number of years have evolved around applying a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion to everything they do, including considerations around leadership and governance. Moving to shorter strategic cycles, mindful that the world can change at what feels to be the speed of light, some are choosing to allow for more agility. For many, considering how to continue to invest on the long term, while at the same time responding to emerging crises is a daily consideration. Some foundations, and for those who read the news today, that includes the Gates Foundation, have decided to sunset, to spend or give away all their money now or in a short amount of time because they feel that this is the moment when it needs to be done. Others see their role as being one that needs to continue in perpetuity, while at the same time also choosing to work counter-cyclically, spending the most when the need is the greatest and when the social return on donations can be the highest. Importantly, foundations and philanthropic organizations also seek to collaborate more, mindful of the fact that one organization alone cannot solve the complex issues at hand. In the field of human rights funding, for instance, our partners at Ariadne noted a commonly held belief at the start of 2025 that this is the moment of opportunity for building better collaborations and cooperation in the sector. Cross-movement cooperation and solidarity, they argue, will be essential to tackle the systemic challenges. Collaboration is also seen as a critical strategy in responding to the recent cuts in official development assistance from US aid, but also from European governments. Across Europe and transatlantically, foundations are exchanging insights and forming partnerships to maximize impacts and avoid duplication. To move beyond the trends today, though, it's interesting to see what stakeholders from a survey we launched in 2024 reported in regards to futurist philanthropy. We have asked them to identify the top internal risks for philanthropy in the future. And at the bottom of the 5 most important risks was elitism, followed on the 4th place by working in silos. 3rd place went to continued work on mainstream topics. 2nd place to being slow in adaptation. And the top of the charts went to conservative boards as being the biggest risk for philanthropy in the future. The good news is that all of this is being picked up and that many in the sector are working to address these risks with due care. As for the new areas of philanthropic investment, we noticed increased investments over the past years in the field of mental health, racial and gender equity, climate, democracy and social cohesion, the new economy and regeneration, and youth. And rather than looking at these topics in isolation, our members are increasingly applying an intersectional and systemic lens, moving beyond addressing of symptoms to engage with deeper root causes. Again, what we see today is that in terms of a perspective on the future, stakeholders see a number of societal vulnerabilities that we may perhaps be overseeing today, but may become a challenge tomorrow. The top here, starting again from the bottom, includes digital divide, spatial segregation and inequality, mental health and well-being, the looming biodiversity crisis with a winning stop for climate migration. it may be important to note that this survey was conducted early 2024, and I would not be surprised to see a different result should we conduct this survey again today. The last trend I wanted to share on before concluding on this talk is perhaps the one that I find the most urgent and most important one. It concerns grant-making practices and relations between foundations and their grantees. Over the past years, the sector has been reflecting deeply on how it deploys a more participatory approach, on moving from short-term project funding to approaches that favor investing flexibly and on the long term. Many are considering more trust-based approaches to giving, favoring mutual learning over output-driven approaches, over restrictive KPI measurements, and over business logics that don't embrace the complexity of long-term work needed to tackle deep societal and planetary challenges. Foundations are also increasingly learning that for change to be sustained, it is important to empower those on the forefront and to value the communities they serve. These reflections became very topical during the pandemic and again during the cost of living crisis, and were accompanied by reflections on what is referred to as the starvation cycle for NGOs, who work from one small earmarked project with limited funds to the next, with little or no ability to invest in their own sustainability, in their own learning, in their own resilience. The fragility this generates has become even more apparent when the recent US aid freeze was announced, and with the decreases of governmental funding also across Europe. With now an ever larger funding crisis at hand, foundations are faced with important ethical dilemmas. Should they focus on sustaining smaller organizations, even if the chance of survival of these organizations has become increasingly grim? How to protect partners in high-risk contexts when you're the only one funding? What is the trade-off between immediate and long-term support? Once again, this context calls upon foundations to embrace more flexible funding. Many are working around the clock to accelerate grants or advance payments, and seeking ways to remove restrictions for their grantees. Many are finding ways to help them with emergency funds, with bridge loans, and support for immediate cash flow issues. More than ever, we are seeing a need for foundations to provide their partners with legal support, be it to work on strategic litigation, or often painfully, to help them let go of staff, merge, or just wind down. When the moment is dire, solidarity and human connection is more needed than ever, and foundations can play a role in supporting grantees with mental health support, creating spaces of solidarity, helping drive optimism and courage, even when the moments are as challenging as they are today. And last but not least, foundations are seeing the value of funding locally and of supporting movements that can play a role as backbone organizations for the sector and increase resilience altogether. As always, a crisis can be an opportunity, and for many foundations, today again is one of those critical junctions. It is a moment to rethink what long-term democratic resilience could look like, to create containers for imagination, for creativity, for resilience. Eventually, this is where foundations and philanthropic organizations are so well placed. They can respond quickly to shifting needs and crises thanks to their built-in flexibility and independence. Free from political cycles and backed by their own funding, they can adapt strategies and fully deploy resources to stay focused on their mission and on what matters for the generations ahead. Whether it is by spending more or spending differently, by pursuing new partnership, by trying innovative investment approaches, or by using their independence to take risks others can't, my belief is that philanthropy is, more than ever, essential to create a more hopeful future. This is where I remain, even if I do worry a lot, an optimist. This is where I remain determined. In support of this determination, I want to quote philanthropy researcher Rodri Davies, who says that over the centuries, philanthropy has played a major role in shaping our world, from sustaining the anti-slavery movement to supporting cutting-edge medical research. It reflects fundamental truth about the values we hold and how we interact with each other. It is a vital mechanism for redistributing resources within society alongside the state and the market. it is again today at a turning point. And as we are indeed at a turning point, I want to go back to the core theme of my talk, which took me through long dwellings on the sector, over threats faced, and onto more hopeful trends. The theme of my talk was the European philanthropy ecosystem, collaboration, innovation, and solidarity, a driver for relevant change. It was posed as a question, which I will leave you to answer as you see fit. To me, the ever-evolving forest of philanthropy, connected to a shared soil and facing the same interconnected threats in its environment, is needed more than ever to deliver on relevant change. If it courageously invests in collaboration, innovation, and solidarity, I believe a world with philanthropy can be one that can bring us a better tomorrow. While it will continue to require determination from us all, I believe that the love of humanity can be a driver for relevant change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delphine, for this determined, brilliant, vibrant, brave, wonderful talk. Thank you. I am not sure you are aware, but during your talk, a new Pope is elect. Leon XIV. So it's not all the speakers can say that. So congratulations also for that. Potser és el moment de, si algú de vosaltres voldria fer algun comentari o qüestió, tenim uns minuts, perquè a més, altra cosa que ha fet la Delphine és quadrar exactament els minuts que els li havíem demanat, per tant tenim uns minuts per si algú volgués incorporar al debat tan obert que ens ha deixat. Per tant, sé que tenim alguns micros perquè us puguin sentir i aquí veig una mà aixecada i confio que de seguida, ja l'estic veient jo, arribarà un micro. Podem fer les preguntes en la llengua que vulguem, la Delphine tindrà alguna traducció, si algú la vol fer en alguna llengua que no entengui ella, que són poques, aquí és aquí. Perquè si algú vol adreçar-se amb ella en flamenc, en francès, en alemany, l'entendrà i si no li traduiran. Vinga, endavant. Estava fent temps per la pregunta, simplement.
And thanks for the presentation and explanation. I would like to make a question about do you see a progress on the public-private collaboration in philanthropy?
Excellent question. And I wanted to make sure to stick as closely as possible to the time allocated, so I didn't go into this topic. But indeed, public-private philanthropy partnerships is something that we're seeing much more interest in at different levels. So we focus on this also at the European level, where the European Commission is also seeking opportunities to provide spaces for co-investment and looking at co-investment facilities that philanthropy can be involved in. And as PHILEA, we see value in that. We're promoting those ideas. We're also supporting our members in being actors in, for instance, the EU Cities Mission level, where there are real opportunities to do that. So yes, there is definitely an appetite for it. I would say that oftentimes I find that the partners on the different ends don't necessarily understand each other as well as they should. So just this week we responded to a consultation from the European Commission around the multi-annual financial framework. And one of the recommendations that we've made is that if the Commission wants to partner with philanthropy, maybe it should have a central facility that understands what that could look like. Because in today's context, every conversation we go into, we have a Director General within the European Commission that is trying to reinvent the wheel, and that's not very efficient. So I think trying to understand each other and seeing what it looks like and how it can function is definitely a way forward. And La Caixa has also been involved in some conversations, for instance, at the level of the European Investment Bank. So yes, it's a trend. It's to be explored with core and care, but it's definitely something that we'll see more of, I think, in the future. Thank you for the question.
Wow. Ricardo.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. One question. We are in the middle of a big transfer of wealth between generations. My question is how far this process, that means especially funds and money, how far affects the foundation system as far as you have identified? Thank you.
Again, thank you. Excellent question. We do think that the great wealth transfer will have an impact on philanthropy. While I mentioned in my talk in France, there's been a report that foundations that are being set up today are set up by increasingly younger people. But we do see that those that are beneficiaries of that great wealth transfer have very different ideas about how they want to do their philanthropy. So we're seeing completely new forms emerge, and we're also seeing new wealth holders come on stage and say, actually, I want to be taxed, and I want to be taxed more, and I think this should be a move. So it will be a little bit of an exploration to see what happens, but by all means, this will have an impact on the sector. Absolutely. So we'll be on the lookout for what that can be.
I haven't said before, but if you would like to say, to introduce yourself, probably, as we are in community, it will be good for the rest.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mark. I work for World Central Kitchen. Thanks, Delphine, for the presentation. I wanted to ask you if you've seen more interest in across Europe to establish donor advice funds as a more agile mechanism that building foundations and probably more successful in transferring wealth into impact.
Definitely in some countries we're seeing that. I think it depends also on whether you have a facility that is allowing for this to happen, which is more the case, for instance, in France and the UK, in Belgium, you have very strong foundations that allow for this. So there the trends are indeed on the rise. I imagine, but I don't have data at hand, that in some of the other European countries it's a bit less. I'm not expecting a lot of donor advised funds to necessarily emerge in Hungary currently. So again, it depends on the context, but it's something that is happening. And I mean, interestingly, with the situation in the US, where philanthropy is also under threat, that's also a question mark that is emerging. Is there a possibility to use that vehicle to perhaps move assets around a little bit so that we can safeguard them?
Thank you. Havia alguna pregunta més? Un comentari? No? És el moment? És el moment? Deixem-ho més. Aquí endavant, sisplau. Estava aguantant aquests segons.
Thank you, Delphine. I'm Guiomar from Educo. In Spain, we are seeing the impact investment as a new trend, and I would like to ask you about what are your thoughts. Could be this a threat for philanthropy? Because every time we see a large amount of philanthropic foundations putting the money in impact investment, is this a threat for philanthropy?
I would probably say cautiously no, in the sense that impact investing is also a tool that some of the philanthropic organizations have in their own toolbox. And they they're increasingly testing whether deploying it achieves the impact that they want it to have. So as such a threat to philanthropy, no, but I understand that your question is also about how about the pure grant making. I think overall we see that the pure grant making is definitely still a very big part of the work of foundations that do grant make, and not all of those make grants. But there is an interest definitely in impact investing, and interestingly there are also a lot of barriers to impact investing. I mean also legal and administrative barriers to whether or not foundations can take risks with their endowments that allow them to invest their endowments as impact investments, because they have to uphold the overall level of their endowment. So on kind of the asset side, we'd be happy to see more flexibility for foundations, and so that they could do that with their endowments, and perhaps leave the program side if that is what they wish to do, and that is where they think they are best placed for the more traditional grant making. But again, I think the sector is incredibly diverse, and the fact that foundations have very diverse toolboxes so that they can respond and invest in different ways is what makes them such wonderful organizations. But it's a good question.
Hello, Jordi Pardo from the Pablo Casals Foundation, Pau Casals Foundation. Thank you for the presentation. My question is, within this context of around 95% of the world richness is under the hands of 2 or 5% of the population, and under the pressure of this crisis affecting the middle class, traditional areas, which is the future, in your opinion, of the philanthropy of the middle classes?
The future of philanthropy of middle classes. Did I understand it well? Okay.
Yeah.
I think I can only give you my personal opinion. So it's not something that we've done any kind of research on. I think and hope that the sense of hostility and polarization that we're seeing today will decrease, and that people will continue to find ways to care for each other, also in the middle class. And whether that philanthropy is then giving big amounts of money or just helping each other out, I think there is a lot of potential there. And I think philanthropy, what's beautiful about it is that it has so many forms. So I'm hoping that there will be a continuation of philanthropy, but definitely the big money is amalgamated much more at the top, and it will be important to see what that means and that it doesn't create more of that hostility and more of that polarization, because it undermines the fabric of our society.
I have also a question for you. I hope that you say great question also. But
I have to.
No, you don't have. Taking into account that probably here it's a selected audience related to foundations, can you explain us how easy it is to become a member of PHILEA?
Well, first let me say that it's a great question. So it's a great question, and I'm glad that you ask. So no, it's possible to become a member of PHILEA. It's a matter of sending us an email, and then we go through a procedure that is somewhat annoying, where we want to understand who you are and what it is that you want to get out of being a member of PHILEA. And we don't do that just for the sake of being annoying, but we do that because we think it's important to have a good relationship so that the marriage, once it's concluded, is as fruitful as possible. So it's a matter of sending an email, and then as a member, you are, in most cases, a foundation. You have access to conversations in thematic networks, in communities of practice. You can attend our PHILEA forum, which takes place in a couple of weeks at a reduced price, with less risk of no longer being able to join, because I've been told today that we're fully booked. But you can also participate just in responding to what's happening in the world and finding peers with whom you can have safe spaces to talk, to exchange, to learn, to know more about what it means to be in this sector in this current moment. So again, a very good question, and find us on our website, philea.eu, and we'll go through the paperwork with you. That's about it.
Allow me to be more direct. Please take into consideration being a member of PHILEA. It's a great decision. Yeah, sorry. It's the commercial part that we cannot forget.
It's so wonderful when the president instead of the CEO does the commercial part.
I'm not sure if there is any further question before we are going to close or comment. Probably we will have time around here to have more comments around. But if I cannot see, yes, I can. Please, go ahead. And the other way around, just a little bit, because we will hear you better. And it will be better for recording and for translating. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Elena Guardans. I'm talking about representation of Liceu de Barcelona, the Opera House. And I am worried about culture, because there are so many needs that you say that people were worried about: climate, equality, democracy. And I didn't know if I couldn't see it, but I didn't see any mention about culture, which I think it makes really a big difference in the world. And I wanted to understand your opinion about that.
I agree with you. I think culture is part of what brings people together. It's also something that we care about a lot within PHILEA. We have a dedicated arts and culture thematic network, which is incredibly vibrant, and which also has a very innovative approach of looking at the role of culture in society. But beyond that, I think in the current crisis that we're living, I'm often reminded of some of our members, for instance, in the Balkans, who, when going through war, told us afterwards that yes, they needed food, but what they needed even more was art and culture to remain that sense of humanity that actually helps you overcome divide. So I think culture, even if it's not mentioned as a top priority for investment, cuts across all of that and brings us very close to what we have and what we share as human beings. So yes, absolutely, it is a very important part of philanthropy. It's also one of the areas philanthropy invests in the most, and still is.
Would you like to have the opportunity to have the last question? No, if not, I just would like to end to this evening that has been really brilliant, I said again. Thank you, Delphine, for taking your time to be here and to share with us your vision. I think that has been very useful. It's the type of debate that are important, that allows us to think in the future. Thank you very much. And allow me just to say, I turn for a bit to Catalan again, to say, sembla que aquest tema desperta molt interès, això ho hem vist, oi? Tant és així que la setmana que ve, aquí mateix, a Palau Macaya, hi ha un altre debat, en aquest cas, sobre la cooperació entre les agències multilaterals i les fundacions. Per tant, tots aquells que tingueu molt interès en el món de les fundacions, el 14 de maig, a la tarda, aquí a Macaya, també podeu tornar a venir. I per aquells que vulgueu més, perquè no en teniu prou, el 13 de juny s'ha organitzat un dinar col·loqui, si no recordo malament, a l'hotel Plaza, allà a la plaça Espanya, que clou un conjunt de debats que s'han fet promoguts per un grup de persones, una de les quals és la Glòria Oliver, que la tenim aquí davant, al voltant del tema fundacional. 13 de juny, dinar col·loqui sobre les fundacions, el pilar. Jo corregiria el títol, perquè diu el pilar de l'estat del benestar, i jo diria que és el pilar de la societat del benestar, perquè les fundacions construïm societats més que estats, però és igual, no volia esmenar la plana, perdó. Sorry for that. I això si em permet cloure amb una frase que al primer PHILEA Fòrum de la història que va ser fet aquí a Barcelona, li vam demanar de cloure el debat, aquells 3 dies de debats, al Javier Solana, molt vinculat, com sabeu, president del nostre comitè científic, a la Fundació La Caixa, i ell va resumir, ell ho va dir una mica més llarg i més bonic, però ell va venir a resumir una idea amb un auditori d'unes 800 persones allí junts, va dir: m'he passat tota la vida construint Europa des dels estats. Vosaltres teniu l'oportunitat de construir Europa des de la societat. I aquell va ser un missatge que va calar molt fort i que encara ens inspira molts a seguir endavant en la construcció d'una Europa que sigui potser més basada, com més fundacions hi hagi a Europa, segurament farem una Europa millor. Moltíssimes gràcies. Thank you very much.